You're standing in a stone chamber 20 feet underground, and the only light comes from torches that make the shadows dance like demons on the walls. Your wrists are already raw from the iron shackles, and you can hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness, each drop marking time you don't have left. 3 men are watching you. One wears the robes of a priest. One holds keys that jingle with each breath he takes. But it's the third man who terrifies you most, because he's dressed like a healer, and he's checking your pulse with the detached professionalism of someone measuring ingredients for bread. He's not here to save you. He's here to calculate exactly how much suffering your body can endure before it stops being useful. And in his practiced touch, in the careful way he listens to your heartbeat, you understand with perfect clarity that this is not chaos. This is a system, and you are about to be processed. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world right now, drop a comment and let me know. It's genuinely extraordinary that stories this dark can connect us across centuries and continents, reminding us why we can never forget. What you just witnessed wasn't an isolated moment of medieval cruelty. It was standard operating procedure during the Spanish Inquisition, an institution that operated for over 300 years, from 1478 until its official abolition in 1834. This wasn't a brief explosion of religious violence. It was a permanent infrastructure of terror, complete with hierarchies, budgets, regional offices, and detailed procedural manuals that specified exactly how to break a human being without killing them too quickly. At its height, the Inquisition employed hundreds of officials across Spain and its territories, inquisitors trained in theology and law, fiscal prosecutors who built cases against the accused, notaries who documented every scream and denial, bailiffs who managed the dungeons, and yes, physicians whose medical expertise was weaponized to extend suffering. The Inquisitor General, appointed by the Spanish monarchy and approved by the Pope himself, wielded power that made kings nervous. Below him stretched a network of tribunals in cities like Seville, Toledo, and Valencia, each one processing accusations of heresy, witchcraft, blasphemy, and secret practice of Judaism or Islam. The system was designed to be inescapable. Once accused, your odds of acquittal were statistically negligible. The accusation itself was treated as evidence. Your guilt was presumed, and your only path to mercy was confession, which they would extract by any means necessary. For women, the Inquisition held a particular kind of horror. They represented roughly 40% of those brought before the tribunals, accused of crimes that often targeted female sexuality, reproductive autonomy, and spiritual independence. A woman who practiced herbal medicine could be accused of witchcraft. A woman who questioned church doctrine could be labeled a heretic. A woman who refused a priest's advances might find herself accused of consorting with demons. And once the machinery of accusation began moving, it was almost impossible to stop. The arrest would come without warning, often at night. She'd be seized from her home, her family given no information about where she was being taken or what she'd been accused of. This was deliberate. Isolation was the first weapon they used. She'd be thrown into a cell, sometimes for weeks or months, with no human contact except the guards who brought meager food. The silence, the uncertainty, the complete loss of control, this was psychological torture that began long before any physical device touched her skin. Then would come the first interrogation. The Inquisitor might seem almost kind at first, his voice gentle, his manner suggesting that this was all a terrible misunderstanding that could be quickly resolved with honesty. He'd offer her a way out. Just confess, just admit to the heresy. Name the others who participated. Do this, and the Church could show mercy. But this gentleness was a trap more sophisticated than any iron device, because if she confessed, she was guilty, and if she maintained her innocence, she was lying, which meant she was unrepentant, which meant she required stronger persuasion. The Inquisitor would shake his head with what looked like genuine sadness, as if her refusal to cooperate left him no choice. And then she'd be taken downstairs. The walk to the torture chamber was itself a calculated act of psychological destruction. She'd be led down stone steps that grew colder with each descent, the air becoming thick and damp, carrying smells of rust and fear, and something else she couldn't quite identify but that made her stomach turn. And then she'd enter the chamber, and she'd see them, the instruments, arranged with the careful precision of a surgeon's tools. This moment had a formal name in the Inquisition's procedural manual, terridio, the showing of the instruments. An official would walk her through the room, explaining each device with the calm professionalism of a craftsman discussing his trade. This one pulls the joints apart. This one crushes the bones. This one simulates drowning. The descriptions were detailed, specific, designed to force her imagination to experience the torture before her body did. For many women, this was enough. The promise of agony, made real through careful description, broke them completely. They'd confess to anything, sign any document, implicate any name just to prevent the demonstration from becoming reality. But not all women broke at this stage. Some, with a strength that defies modern comprehension, refused to lie. They refused to confess to heresies they hadn't committed. They refused to damn innocent friends and neighbors with false accusations that would only spread the machinery of persecution wider. For these women, the instruments stopped being threats and became experiences. The rack was perhaps the most infamous device in the Inquisition's arsenal, and its horror lay in its terrible simplicity. Imagine a long wooden frame, perhaps 8 feet in length, with thick rollers mounted at each end. The woman would be laid on her back along the frame, and her wrists would be chained to one roller while her ankles were secured to the other. Then, with her body stretched between these 2 fixed points, the turning would begin. At first, it was just uncomfortable pressure, a pulling sensation at the shoulders and hips. But the operators didn't stop. They turned the rollers slowly, methodically, and the pulling became tearing. Ligaments that held her joints together would begin to stretch beyond their limits. The pain would escalate from discomfort to agony, to something beyond language. And still they'd turn the rollers. Shoulders would dislocate with audible pops that echoed in the stone chamber. Her spine would stretch until vertebrae separated. Hips would wrench from their sockets. In the most extreme applications, limbs could be pulled entirely from the body. But before any of this physical destruction began, there was another torture that left no marks on the body but carved itself into memory. In a society that weaponized female modesty, where a woman's virtue was tied inextricably to her covered body, she would be stripped naked by male captors. This forced nakedness before strange men was itself considered a form of torture, an assault on dignity designed to break her spirit before they broke her bones. She'd stand there, exposed and vulnerable, while men discussed her body with clinical detachment, deciding which devices would be most effective against her particular frame. The humiliation was the point. The message was clear. You have no privacy, no dignity, no control over even your own skin. And through all of this, through the stripping and the binding and the turning of the rollers, through the screams that would eventually become hoarse whispers and then just broken gasping, a notary sat at a small table in the corner of the room. His quill scratched across parchment with steady rhythm, recording every detail. First turn of the wheel, she cries out but maintains her innocence. Second turn, she begs for mercy but does not confess. Third turn, her shoulder dislocates, audible at 6 paces. The notary's job was documentation, creating legal records that could be reviewed by higher authorities to ensure procedures were followed correctly. What he actually created was a permanent archive of atrocity. Thousands of pages that survive today in Spanish archives, bearing witness to suffering the Inquisition thought it was recording as righteous justice. If the rack destroyed the body horizontally, another device attacked it vertically, using the victim's own weight as the weapon. The strappado was brutally efficient in its design. A woman's hands would be bound tightly behind her back, wrists crossed and lashed together with rough rope. That rope would then be threaded through an iron ring or pulley mounted high on the ceiling. Then, with a word from the inquisitor, she'd be hoisted into the air, her entire body weight suspended from her backward wrenched arms. The pain was immediate and absolute. Every pound of her body pulled downward on shoulder joints twisted into positions they were never meant to hold. Within minutes, the agony would be overwhelming. But the Inquisition had refined this basic torture into something more diabolical. Sometimes heavy stones would be tied to her feet, adding extra weight that multiplied the downward pull. The shoulders would begin to tear themselves apart from the inside. The most horrifying variation was called the strappado with drop. She'd be hoisted high toward the ceiling, her feet dangling uselessly, her shoulders screaming in agony. And then, without warning, the rope would be released. She'd plummet downward in a sickening freefall, her stomach lurching, her mind certain she was about to hit the stone floor and die. But just before impact, the rope would catch with brutal, sudden force. The jerk would be devastating. Shoulders already stressed beyond endurance would be ripped completely from their sockets. The sound, a wet, tearing pop, was something the notaries noted in their records with disturbing frequency. The psychological torture of anticipating that fall, of not knowing when it would come, was often as destructive as the physical trauma. Women who survived the strappado were frequently left unable to use their arms for the rest of their lives. There's a documented case from 1485 of a woman accused of secretly practicing Jewish rituals who endured this torture for 3 hours. The notary recorded that despite her evident agony, despite her shoulders being permanently destroyed, she never confessed. They released her only when the physician warned that death was imminent. She lived for another decade, unable to lift her arms above her waist, her body a permanent testament to her refusal to lie. Some torture devices were designed not merely to inflict pain, but to attack the essence of womanhood itself. The breast ripper, also known as the iron spider, stands as one of the most horrifying instruments ever devised. Forged from iron, it consisted of 4 curved prongs shaped like talons. Before use, the device was heated in a brazier until it glowed red. Then it was clamped to a woman's exposed breast and, in one brutal motion, torn away, ripping out flesh, muscle, and sometimes the entire breast. The agony was unimaginable. Many women died immediately from shock or blood loss. Others lingered for days, consumed by infection. Yet the point was not only physical destruction, it was symbolic annihilation. The device declared that a woman's body, her fertility, her sexuality, her very identity, was subject to male authority and could be obliterated at will. The breast ripper was often used against women accused of adultery, abortion, or witchcraft, crimes that the Inquisition linked directly to female sexuality and reproductive power. These sins were considered not only moral failings but threats to divine and social order. Torture thus became both punishment and propaganda, transforming women's bodies into public warnings. Those who survived were left mutilated, their scars used as evidence of guilt and deterrence for others. But not all forms of torture left visible wounds. Some were designed to destroy from within, leaving no trace for observers to see. Among the most infamous was toka, or water torture, a method so psychologically devastating that its basic principle still echoes in modern interrogations centuries later. The victim, often a woman accused of heresy or secret blasphemy, was strapped to a tilted wooden bench, her head lower than her feet. Her mouth was pried open with an iron bit, and a linen cloth was draped across her face. Then water was poured slowly, steadily, until the cloth sealed to her skin. Each breath became a drowning. Her lungs filled with water, her chest convulsed, her body fought for air that never came. The tortures would stop just as she began to lose consciousness, pull away the cloth and let her cough and vomit up the water, then begin again. Toka was a masterpiece of controlled cruelty. It left no broken bones, no open wounds, nothing a physician could easily identify as torture. But it shattered the mind. Survivors suffered permanent lung damage, chronic coughing, and lifelong terror at the sight or sound of water. The Inquisition's genius lay in its bureaucratic neatness. A woman could be destroyed without leaving evidence that might stain the institution's moral veneer. Other instruments worked through slower, more deliberate suffering. Thumbscrews and leg screws crushed flesh and splintered bone, one turn at a time. The chair of torture, a seat lined with hundreds of iron spikes, forced the victim to sit motionless while weights were added to her lap, driving the spikes deeper into her flesh. Every breath made the pain worse. Every movement became an act of self-destruction. These devices weren't used in chaotic fits of rage, but as deliberate demonstrations of power. Each screw, each turn, each drop of water declared the same message. The body belongs to authority, and resistance will be made meaningless through suffering. How do we know all this? Because the Inquisition, in its obsession with order and record-keeping, wrote everything down. Across Spain, in the archives of Simancas, Madrid, and Valencia, thousands of pages survive. Trial transcripts, procedural manuals, notaries' reports. These documents list not only the devices used, but the duration of each session, the number of turns of a screw, the exact words uttered by the accused. They reveal a terrifying paradox, an institution of faith that worshipped documentation more than mercy. In these archives, we still hear the voices of the women they tried to silence. Elvira del Campo, tortured in Toledo in 1567 for secretly practicing Judaism, endured multiple sessions on the rack yet never confessed. Maria de Zozaya, accused of witchcraft in 1610, was subjected to the strappado, her arms bound behind her and hoisted until her shoulders dislocated. A notary recorded her screams word for word, unmoved. Their names survive only because the men who destroyed them believed they were writing proof of righteousness. Instead, they created a record of cruelty that outlived the empire that sanctioned it. It's tempting to dismiss such history as relics of barbarism, a product of superstition and ignorance that humanity has since overcome. But that explanation is too comforting. The Spanish Inquisition was not the work of a few sadistic outliers. It was a system, legal, theological, and administrative. It operated with rules, procedures, and hierarchies. Its torturers were not wild men, but trained officials, priests, judges, doctors, who sincerely believed they were defending truth. They prayed before and after torture sessions. They recorded the proceedings meticulously. They saw themselves not as monsters, but as servants of order. This is the most terrifying lesson of all. Extraordinary evil does not require extraordinary people. It only requires ordinary people acting within systems that make cruelty seem righteous. The physician who monitored a victim's pulse to ensure she wouldn't die too soon was performing his duty. The notary who wrote down her screams was doing his job. The inquisitor who ordered another round of toca was fulfilling his responsibility to God. Each man could tell himself he bore no guilt because the system defined his cruelty as virtue. That logic has never disappeared. Institutions still dehumanize in the name of order, still rationalize suffering as necessity. The tools have changed. Iron claws replaced by algorithms, dungeon cells by sterile interrogation rooms, but the structure of power remains the same. Systems that justify harm through authority, faith, or security are the Inquisition's descendants. Reading the Inquisition's records isn't morbid curiosity, it's bearing witness. The bureaucracy that sought to sanctify torture also preserved its victims' last words, leaving behind a moral map of what happens when certainty gains absolute power and empathy is dismissed as weakness. In Spain, some of those chambers still exist, stone rooms beneath churches, silent and airless. The iron is gone, melted long ago, but the walls remember. Stand there long enough and you feel the weight of what civilization tries to forget. The Inquisition ended in 1834. No trials, no apologies. The victims were never exonerated. Yet through those meticulous records, they still speak. Their endurance is defiance, proof that even systems built to erase humanity cannot silence it completely. These women remind us that courage is truth spoken through terror. We cannot undo their pain, but we can refuse to let it vanish. Memory is the antidote to certainty. Their voices survive as warning. Never let obedience replace compassion, or conviction justify cruelty. That is the weight we carry forward.